Hi, and welcome back to Authors Who Make You Think, and I appreciate your wanting to think on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. But I want to just tell you a tiny story, which is that Litquake began 8 years ago in the band shell at Golden Gate Park. In fact, Jonathan Keats, one of our readers, was there. 20 readers in one afternoon, and in 8 years it's ballooned into 8 days, 350 writers in 50-something venues around the city.
I'm going to read a few poems that have been published here and there, and the first one is called After the Bleeding, and it was inspired by two photos that were in the San Francisco Chronicle in June 2005. The first, I'm going to read the captions, photo captions, and then I'll follow with a poem. Children watch as police collect pieces of bodies from a suicide car bombing in Tikrit, Iraq. Front page photo caption, San Francisco Chronicle, June 14, 2005. A fan releases doves for the not guilty verdicts in the Michael Jackson trial. Front page photo caption, San Francisco Chronicle, June 14, 2005. After the bleeding, the blood-splattered walls draw the tentative gaze of children wanting to see what has caused such a noise. How can they not stare? Arms and legs, pieces of a torso scattered across Saddam Boulevard, the smell of new death and seared hair. They must be asking the same question. A person who blows themselves up must believe in something or else not. Hopelessness dressed in a vest of munitions, righteousness disguised in a tuxedo of death. The children don't understand. I keep thinking about the dead, dying men, the bleeding bystanders who left their flats to buy bread, cheese, or a little tobacco. Baghdad is burning, Tikrit is exploding in car bombs, suicide bombs, and we keep talking as though this will end like the final judgment of that black man who looks white and sleeps with boys but doesn't touch them. After the bleeding, the children's shoes will be forever stained in the crimson color of death. Who will set the doves free then? This next poem is called Disaster on the Horizon. I'm sure many of you have seen and heard regularly in the news the saber rattling against Iran. My father came from Iran, so every time I see those headlines, every time I get a Seymour Hersh article in my email, I have this moment of panic thinking about my family members in Iran who might be the next victims of this terrible warmongering administration. So this is a poem called Disaster on the Horizon, and it's for the people of Iran. It begins with words, daggers of men who bleed their nations of hope, kill any promise. Here is war, a bag full of hate, threats blanketed in heat, posturing, angry man rhetoric, unleashing disaster on the horizon. War has no face. At first it sounds like a bell striking midnight, but like a genie, it doesn't go back in the bottle. It is endless, this storm. You cannot call this back. This witchery gives nothing. It is a tornado that sucks up life, spits out ashes and broken minds I can feel in my bones. Near as anyone whose face I see, whose eyes I hold tight, fixed on this compass, I see this war coming, breaking loose in these mouths. They are monsters who cannot see the people who will weep. They are creators of a destruction that begins on the tongue and ends in the cold eyes of tomorrow.
Last year, I read 9 stories in my allotted 6 minutes. This year, I thought I'd be a little more ambitious, and I would read you 10. The first is called Cosmology. After they learned that the universe was a mass-produced toy tossed away by an adolescent goddess, they no longer wondered why laws, once as sure as the clockwork inside a wind-up bird, were shot with uncertainties. Confidence shattered, optimists attributed the free fall of reason to the fact that the toy was broken. Pessimists acknowledged this, but insisted that only in its broken state could the cosmos belong to those who lived within? Eons passed before the goddess, fully grown, found the universe under a couple board games in a closet. She did not, however, give it to her children. She didn't have it fixed by her mechanically inclined husband. Instead, slipping away now and then from her family, she delighted secretly at the haphazard way in which it ran, the only spring of relief in her perfectly ordered life. The next one is titled Explanation. It's a little bit shorter. Twisted and gnarled, tree branches explain exactly themselves. The next is called A Simple Story. His love was too simple. If he met a woman, he imagined what it would be like to be her husband. Naturally, he often learned that she was already attached. If she wasn't and chanced to take an interest in him, he'd bring her fresh oranges and surrender his fate to her whim. In consequence, she'd leave him, certain that no man could love truly on such scant evidence. His evidence, however, was not meager, for he wasn't trying to judge her, and he knew himself well enough. His love was too simple, and he'd belong to her, the woman who belonged to him, simply if her love was as simple as his. Emigration. Their final night together, before she had to go back home, she clung to him as if he were a mighty cliff, and between them and morning was an awful abyss. Gradually, as they slept, though neither felt it happening, her grasp slackened, and by the cool damp of dawn, not even their fingertips were touching. He shivered, reached for her. The woman's hazy blue eyes opened, one at a time. They took a while to focus. When they did, they appeared not to be looking at his familiar skin, but surveying a foreign land. This is called regrets. If only she'd known, as she did on her deathbed, that she would not find the love of her life, she'd have reached, perhaps, the same great age, but she'd never have lived. Next story is called Retirement. The pampered old cat slept day and night, happily dreaming about napping. And a slightly shorter story than that, called QWERTY. The bug that crawled across the keyboard didn't leave word. The next story is called A Second Chance. After their myth was written, lives morphed into lesson, Echo was permitted to marry Narcissus, who'd once spurned her repeated odes only to be shunned by his own cold reflection. She tried not to fret that vanity had diminished him to a few petals around a stamen. What would have been the thrill of having him whole, since misery had stripped her nymphal body, leaving just the mockery of a voice? She had him potted and carried him back to her cavern. Still, their lives together were wanting, and not only because in their condition they had trouble conceiving children. They became estranged, though she longed to give him everything, and he was eager to take it all. What chance did they have? Echo was no reflecting pool, and Narcissus was not a singer. Each sought the other through a different mirror. A story called Epitaph. What happened, happened. And finally, a story that is called Terminals. In the last moment of his life, time slowed and slowed to a halt. No longer pressed as he'd been in youth, he strolled the world on foot and thought over every thought. Love and war and the scattering of stars, he grasped the meaning of it all as a whole. He yearned to share what he knew. Yet those who lived on and might have learned had naturally moved to a future where his still voice would not be heard. Thank you.
Hello. I'm going to read a scene from Draining the Sea, which is coming out in March. And it's hard to situate you, but the book takes place, part of the book, in Guatemala during the worst years of the civil conflict, the 80s. And this scene is a scene from the Polytechnic, the Army Technical School, where they would take the disappeared, some of them anyway. The girl's name is Marta. A Manual for the Americas. We are inside the basement of the Polytechnic, and I am admiring the bone shadows that your heel bone makes in the sunlight inside the palms of my hand in my mind. When you come to my bed, your feet and hands, your breath is sweet, and we can love like this for hours. I can find Christ in your body. This, too, the documents have instructed, must be killed like a show on television, slowly and with pain and blood that is beautiful, like a red river. You made me into a woman, and I surrendered to it. The Christ was a woman also, to clean your feet, the heel. A man made into a woman and returned. But you don't come to my bed. This is the metal cot you are chained to in the Polytechnic. The manual stipulates the killing of the communist first, and I do. We do it slowly, with time's extensions. A Christ, his face removed, his penis removed with a red-hot coffee-cutting implement, the maggots in the wounds, the teeth and hair weeks before. He is your Christ in the black pit with you. Each day becomes eternities of days. The sun never sets or rises, the bare light bulb on a wire. And while I hold you on the examining table, the metal cot, and I burn you 117 times with my cigarettes, while the other guards have gone out for a meal, beef steaks, tortilla, potato, red wines, then I will ask for your forgiveness. I understand that you become a Christ today also. And you look at me, or rather, you stare at me, make a picture on my closed eyelids, make a picture on the colored lit discs covering my eyes, on the pupil through these tinted lenses to arrive at my retina. I am always wearing the sunglasses in this room, for what I cannot say. So this look, a stare, I have said, an ethereal beast looks from his bodied cage where pain is made into a commodity of sugary things, where sugar, sleep, your head pulled from the basin of water, where breath can be enough to make me into your God, but a God without rivers, an unsatrapied God of the shadow's shadow, lonely on his throne. I whisper into your ear hole, the ears removed an hour ago, making you look more and more the simian whore. I whisper into the hole, a beautiful whorl still visible beneath the cracks, blood, bones. Is it possible for me also to be saved? You begin retching. The vomit heaves you up from the cot where you are held by the chain, and you cannot stop the retching, the heaves, continual shaking of your legs and arms, the hands, the nose not removed, not yet. And I, for some reason, take the bottle of wine which I have been drinking, and against all of the rules in my manual, begin to toss it down your throat as you begin crying now, uncontrollably, like a child will do it, crying but not speaking to me, a prelingual child. You remind me of my black self, an hysterical flight of the sorrowful form, tears and your mouth agape like a bird's, as I pour the wine into your mouth, and you sputtering and spitting and want more of it, and we drink the rest of the bottle together, you and I, the unsainted God, your agapet, the sobbing girl. There in the dark I hold you closely, and we are like lovers amidst the howls of shit, floors, your ear shells on the floor next to my booted feet, mine own hands, handiwork. After work, I will try to have these specimens saved, and to this end I go to a taxidermist shop in the capital, but the man puts on a look of horror when I pull the ear shells from my jacket, wrapped carefully in cloth, and he refuses to do it, to preserve them for me, and my 9mm also makes a look of horror when he sees it, and I return for him later that week and unmake his look, so that I will never do it again. Your ear shells forgotten, a rodent feast perhaps, diptera delight, in the trash bin of the Polytechnic, where I toss them, of history. Days later, I am convinced I see one hand, the left, right, carried off by a small rat, his dinner, and so I investigate the rat for days afterwards, seeking the traces of your body and of the animals. Is this not some form of transcendence, my darling? But of a lower variety, certainly, a downward rising, the maggots themselves small white gods, like an animal mob. You did not, of course, answer my question with the language that we used between us. You vomited. You stared into or at the lenses I wore to cover my pupils that keep some things in and other things out, but ineffectual plastic screens. Ah, Marta, was it not possible to make love in that place? I could have saved you, a piece of you, and I do make an essay, and I listened and I obeyed. I had hoped to carry your earshell with me into eternity, a preservation piece for the peace of our species. I read the manual from beginning to end, a manual for the masters and the slaves. And the master hates the slave who refuses him her soul. Yes, he owns the form, the ears and face and sad and lonely wrists, but not the ineffable. We would like your spirit. It is what we seek in these dark pits of the capital. What else could be accomplished or desired? The speaking, the words I can make you utter, all of the phrases forced with breathy sound in the language that we use between us, this Castilian, this not what I'm after, I won't pretend. Information like a dog and we beat the dog, kill the dogs. No, it is you I want, that withheld piece. What shall I call it except love? Why can't you give it to me? Why, even at the end, the pit's stench has defeated you, the pit's death howls, the pit's endless night. Why, even then, even when your vagina has been opened to the air like a ripe plum, purple, reds, your breasts slashed, why, how, then do you still withhold it from me? I am only a man, after all, and I cannot live without it, a schooled boy of these Americas. Thank you.
So I'm going to take us to the backwoods of Georgia, where I believe it's the first week of hunting season. In 1955, the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto arrived in South Florida with wild pigs in tow. In 2004, at Ken Holyoke's fishery in Alapaha, Georgia, a 12-foot, 1,000-pound pig was killed. It's unclear whether this pig, Houghteling, got that big by grazing in the wild, or whether he was fed from troughs of peanut and corn, whether he was farm-fed or free-range. When the pig slayer, a Chris Griffin, was asked why he had to go and shoot the pig, Griffin said, "Because I couldn't believe it was so big." I grew up about 20 miles from Alapaha, in a town that put Martin Luther King Jr. in jail for a few nights in 1963. When I heard the story of Houghteling, I started wondering why humans feel the need to kill things that we don't understand. So I'd like to read the Ballad of Houghteling. This is the first time I've read this, so it's a kind of premiere. Part 1 is what I'm reading today. Killer of kid and fawn, muddy wallower, vector for trichinosis and tick, trap smart, non-native, gargantuan flea bag, you root in the understory and oak brush of Alapaha's bogs and swamp. If we killed you now, Houghteling, if we took aim for your belly with our crossbow or laser sight and pulled a trigger or let a tipped arrow rip through the night air, there wouldn't be a story to tell. So while we lay in wait for you to appear, chewing our chaw and chewing the fat, lit up on beer, lit up on the last of the evening light, we'll harness you in speech, lasso you with language, and make you bleat like the common pig you were before all this celebrity. In dreams, you're bigger than we will ever be, so you must be made to suffer for your mystery. The origin of Houghteling. Are you spawn of De Soto's men, herded off galleons, old world swine, long-snouted? Do your upper tusk sharpen the lower? Or did you escape from a defunct abattoir, son of a sow injected with gonadotropin, a hybrid, white blaze of hair across your face, black tufts and telltale tail? Did your 1,000-pound carcass weigh less after the soul's exit, filtering out of your brilliant nostrils, uncontained as a new myth? Oh, your detrimental wallowing, solitary except for one season, Your domestic ken, it's so unferal for them. Your untoward piglets 3 times a year, grouped in sounders, oh careless love, that's ugly and stinky and don't look smart. The ghost of Hogzilla. In the middle month of the year of the boar, the ghost of Hogzilla roams, killed because he was gargantuan. Why must we shoot what we don't understand? Remember the lion blinded by the shelling of the Baghdad Zoo, Uday's menagerie set free to wander. Hogzilla was also liberated by death. His spirit tramples through the strip malls of my hometown, orders a smoothie after pawing through the draw cleaning, or nosing the aisles of baby food, watching us humans enact all the sad and lonely errands of our lives. Among the plastic singing trout, the caged parakeets, sometimes the tricked out twin poodles yapping in a locked Mercedes. All the ghost of Hogzilla wanted was a stand of trees, some bark to rub against, a scattering of acorns. But acorns only fall from oaks, and we cut those down already. Hogzilla's murderer speaks. I summoned you from the swamp and holler as you hunted bulbs and tubers, a red-cheeked salamander in your stomach. When I saw you, I loaded up my rifle with buckshot and took aim. You were the biggest, most beautiful hog I'd ever seen, and that's why I had to make you die, to prove your majesty, to convince my friends of my heroism. I hadn't done much in life yet. Cleaning up beer cans after the hunters left, the deer lease wasn't much to brag about. But as I told that lady from the New York Times, after offering her some Fanta, which she refused, the whole country will eat humble pie after those scientists dig up the carcass of Hogzilla and see the greatness of exactly what I'd done. Thanks.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here again at Litquake. I'm going to jump right into this. I figured in anticipation of Halloween, I would read a story about witches. And this is the beginning and the ending of a story called Blue Fly. Coming home from school on a Monday morning in spring, Sadie Evers stepped through a hole in the schoolyard fence right onto the hem of her dress. When she straightened, the left sleeve separated from its seam. Her brother, Madison, heard it rip. He turned and saw his little sister's bony shoulder naked to the world. Sadie stood trembling, her black eyes 2 burnt holes, the sleeve of her only school dress hanging by threads. Madison grinned. Now you done it, he said. He picked the ripped sleeve from her arm, then let it fall again. You should tear the other side, then they'll be the same. Be quiet, Sadie said. You could be a fancy woman. He leaned down, his hot breath in her ear. You could be a bare-breasted whore. Sadie stared, stony, at her feet. I saw this fancy woman once, Madison said. He put his arm around his sister and began guiding her along the path. She took all the feeling from a man's toes. He was sitting right there on a chair in front of the Strater Hotel. She gave him a foot rub. And when she got to the toes, you know what she done? She put 'em in her mouth. Sadie squinted at her brother. It's true, Madison said. One by one, she put them toes in her mouth and sucked 'em, and they were dirty. But when she was done, you know what? The man starts hollering. He says, I cannot feel my toes. I cannot feel my toes. He jumps up and starts waddling like a turkey. He didn't know he had any toes anymore. Madison grinned. The woman was a witch. The sky was the color of Colorado columbine, and the fields were soft to the touch. All the way home, Madison told his sister about the witches and the world. But when the soddy came into view, he stopped talking. The door to the shack was open, the inside shadowy. There was no one in sight, but he could hear his sister-in-law, Catherine, talking to blue flies. Madison dug his hands deep in his pockets and tucked his chin as if against the weather. Something about the air began to feel dense. Something about it felt like pushing against water on a flooded plain. Well, a lot happens between now and the next morning, but I'll sum it up very quickly. Madison's sister-in-law, Catherine, refuses to fix Sadie's dress, which is ripped, and so Sadie has to wear it to school like that the next day, which really embarrasses her. And Madison and Catherine also have had a little flirtation going on. His sister-in-law is just a few years older than him, and that didn't work out that night. So the next day, Madison feels sorry for Sadie, and he decides he's going to save her the embarrassment, and he is going to sew up her sleeve for her so she doesn't have to be embarrassed at school. So this happens walking to school. Slowly, Sadie unbuttoned her dress and let it fall to her feet. She stood shivering in her shift and watched her brother sew. Because his fingers were stiff and cold and would not move, he jabbed them again and again, and when the blood came, he sucked it until it was gone. The stitches were jagged, some tiny dots, some long lines. When Sadie put the dress on again, the sleeve tucked it a bit too far in so that the sleeve cuffed high on her wrist, and the material bunched at her neck, giving her a little bit of a hump. She had a lopsided look to her, but she did not look like an urchin, and she smiled at her brother. All that morning, Madison watched his little sister where she sat with the younger children, her sleeve a bump on her shoulder. He thought of how it used to be before Catherine came, when they still lived in town with their old man. A lot of the time, it was just Madison and Sadie alone in the house. Mark would go off to get money, and their dad would go off on a drunk. Mornings back then, the sun rose behind Sadie's eyes. She'd come to his bed and open his lids and say, "Maddie, you're hungry." And he'd say, "What time is it?" And she'd say, "Time to go hunting." Sometimes they did, went off hunting and didn't go to school, just the two of them. They took the shortcut home that afternoon. The morning rain had blown over, and the fields steamed in the afternoon heat. Yellow dandelions dotted the sagebrush, and the moist earth gently sucked their shoes. Maddie couldn't help but grin, thinking about what Catherine would say when she saw what he had done. She'd say, "Maddie, did you do this?" He'd say, "Yes, I did." But as they got closer to home, the back of his scalp began to prickle. He saw a thread of smoke lazing into the sky where the soddy would be. They had built the fire already, she and his brother Mark. Sadie was walking ahead. Madison looked at the drunken line of stitches on her sleeve, the crooked child's seam, and the knot of material that rode her shoulder like a hump. The air began to feel thick, like water. "Wait," he whispered, "wait." He grabbed her arm, began picking at the stitches he had made. Sadie tried to wrench away, but he held her hard, picking frantically at her sleeve, and the dark fury, that new look that made him shiver and was not his sister, came into her eyes. But he didn't let go. He said, "This is no good. Don't worry. This is no good." Madison picked and tore the thread until it all came loose, and the blue fly witch could not tell what he had done. Sadie went limp, a rag doll in her brother's grasp. She stared off toward the poplars Mark had planted, which stuck like finger bones out of the earth. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, it's nice to be here. I came on the 14 mission bus to spend 6 minutes with you. If there's time left over after my reading, I'll do some knife tricks. A short story from my collection, This War Called Love. This is a typical Sunday night in the Mission District. Rose-colored dreams. What is Juanito doing this hour of night selling roses in the streets of La Mission? Wine-colored, blood-colored, and pink rosebuds wrapped in cellophane, stuffed in a plastic bucket half his size. He walks into the restaurant thin as a churro. 10 years look like 30 stamped on his forehead. A strong wind could blow him to Daly City or Ocosingo, the mountainous Chiapas town of his birth. All the waitresses and regular customers, the soft-bellied ones and the lean ones, the hard-faced cab drivers, the norteño trios, know Juanito's face, his faded blue sweater, his Mayan profile like a clay pendant from Tonina, his cow lick in black mop of hair. Juan Coco Meredia, Juanito, as his mother calls him, should be home asleep. You know the place, the apartment building on 17th Street, through the lobby door with busted lock, under the sign that says no loitering, past the odor of mildew that curdles your brains, up 3 floors of rickety stairs with broken handrails, down the hallway where gassed cockroaches lie belly up below the broken window. Sweet home. In bed, actually the mattress on the floor he shares with his older sisters, Juanito will dream of a baseball glove or the perfect tail for a kite. Dream a sandia paleta from 24th Street with the one seed always frozen near the bottom. But the family needs more than dreams. That's why Mama, 2 sisters, a baby, Juanito and La Abuela, have traveled by truck and bus, pulled by something stronger than destiny to this 2-room battleground of survival. Right this minute, as Juanito treads Mission Street, Mama in the apartment curls over a pedal-driven singer's sewing machine, zigzagging threads, fine as spider webs, running perfect seams down pants, stitching buttonholes and collars late into the pale yellow hours of her seemingly endless nights. The 2 sisters, Dulce and Primavera, with fingers delicate as ballerinas, hand-stitched beads tiny as dewdrops on dresses that will retail in Union Street boutiques for hundreds of dollars, of which they will receive 25. The baby will be crying in the cardboard crib, a cough racking his sleep, and La Abuela, lost in dreams thick as cataracts, will be chanting Xochitl prayers to Mayan gods before an altar of beeswax candles, pink flower petals, and Pepsi-Cola bottles. The heavy palm incense unraveling in a perfumed string towards the water stain on the ceiling that looks like a map of Latin America. This isn't Mexico City, where Indian families wrapped in newspapers huddle under the monument to the revolution. This isn't Tegucigalpa either, where worm-ravaged girls peddle chiclets on street corners. No, this is La Misión, San Pancho, Califas, Aztlán, land of palm trees and skyscrapers where there's dollars enough for cellular phones, sports cars, and mota by the trunkful, where a suitcase of cocaine is as easy to buy as a broken-stemmed rose from Juanito's white bucket. Oye, chavalo, how much for that handful of rosebuds? 4 elf-sized fingers go up. Juanito makes change for a 20 fast as an abacus, returns his tiny fist clenched with crumpled bills. Gracias, he says, like a man. You tip him a couple of dollars. So what? Every love-struck couple staring into each other's eyes, every loner occupied with a half-empty beer, even the waitress with tired legs waiting for the end of her shift receives a visit from Juanito. Then, with bucket under his arm, he turns one last time to the faces above the steaming plates before he's out into the neon-lit street, leaving behind a trail of rose petals, dark as sacrificial hearts. Thank you.
Whenever I have writer's block, I do research, so I thought I would read you a section, which initially started off as writer's block, and then I did research. It seemed fitting for a reading that took place in a library. I think all you need to know is that my narrator, Max, is 19. The object of his affections is Rose Clement. She's 21. She's the new assistant in his father's art gallery. She also works as a curator in training at the Louvre. Max's mother is a pianist, and she's also Polish. I saw little of Rose Clement even after she moved her 2 upholstered valises into the nurse's room on Valentine's Day of 1939. She did not allow Auguste to drive her to and from the Louvre. She did not pause to converse with me when I lingered in the gallery wearing a new shirt. Nor did she take her meals with our family as my father's other assistants had done. Sometimes this was for the best. At the dinner table, my parents argued. Father had been unsuccessful in keeping the newspapers from Mother. She practiced less and less, but sat at the piano bench with the instrument's keys covered, listening to the Marconi Jubilee. Germany isn't Poland, my father said, slicing his asparagus. The sound of knife on porcelain made Mother wince. There are no Cossacks in Berlin, he muttered. He's a crazy man when I hear him on the radio, Mother said, pressing her temples. I can barely understand this German he is speaking. His mouth is so full with spittle. And he is an Austrian? No, but his accent is fake, Bavarian. That Goebbels they have on, he speaks perfectly, like Satan, but his articulation is perfection. He must be the envy of singers everywhere. My father reached across his dinner plate and laid a hand on hers. She snatched it away. You know nothing, she hissed. You've lived in such comfort here. Now you've got butter on your sleeve. The pitch of her voice dropped. I heard them arrive on horseback. We neither mentioned our absent guest nor the empty chair awaiting her, except on one occasion. Father reported that Mademoiselle Clement had inadvertently insulted the Princess Noailles by calling a certain Gauguin a good deal. The princess never spoke of money herself and bought paintings without inquiring about their price. She left all those details to her lawyer. Snobby old cow was what my father liked to call her. Still, I felt sorry for Rose. With Father, it was so easy to make a mistake and not know it. You could sense his punishment later, but could not identify the crime. After the second week of Rose's apprenticeship, the empty 4th chair disappeared, and we returned to our regular table configuration. Thank God you've stopped wearing that wretched cologne, Mother said to me after dinner. All my food tasted like musk. Pity the Poles, Father said. They lost you, their national treasure. Mother shook her head. No, pity the Poles, because they're trying to jerk Germany off with one hand and the Soviets with the other. This even shocked my father. We ate in silence. That winter, I gathered that Mademoiselle Clement took long, hot showers because I often heard water rushing in the pipes and, when I turned on my own spigot, found it cold. After dark, the lamp in her room made a yellow square in the courtyard until well into the night. I watched it for a shadow or a shape. My most prurient attempts to rig up an old motorcycle mirror on a string and dangle it like a fishing lure failed. Rose's private quarters remained so. I took to skulking in the hallway between the gallery and the street, hoping to catch her there. But I only frightened my father, who struck out at the shadowy figure in his corridor. Verboten, he shouted when he realized it was me. We had begun to speak German to each other as a nervous joke. I went back to tinkering with the motorcycle mirror. I started lifting barbells. For a month, Mother talked only of the German refugee question and whether it was better for Jews to go to the Philippines or the Dominican Republic. Mrs. Roosevelt backed a move to accept 20,000 exiles and then christened the Yankee Air Clipper, America's first queen of the skies, with water from the 7 seas. Pius XI was buried in his cloth of gold mitre. The discoverer of King Tut's tomb also died, though of natural causes, despite his curse. The Italians issued a call to arms of 300,000 men, all war babies, and those considered physically infirm the first time around. When I visited the draft board, I noticed that my card was filed with a crease at its corner. Father's laughter on the telephone was louder than ever. Some clients who decided to buy had their paintings shipped directly to houses in the country. I noticed Lucy hiding bags of sugar in the closet where I kept my tennis racket. To Mother, Father repeated, "Don't worry." She replied, "I do." I wondered if they remembered that they had had a son at all. The heat clanked at the same pace it had my entire life, and yet that month seemed to pass more slowly than others. Rose's presence was fleeting. On one occasion, I passed by Father's office as she sat at the typewriter in a green sweater with a hole at its elbow. Notes in a looping hand were torn in two in the garbage. I found her in the hallway bathroom once with a black tongue as a pen had burst when she licked its nib. I handed her a white towel and said, "Just ruin the cloth," and she looked grateful and closed the door on me as I stood there staring stupidly at her stained mouth. To the light in the courtyard, I sang along with my new American record. There's an oh, such a hungry yearning burning inside of me, and I felt every word in the marrow of my bones. Eventually, August said, "I hate this Cole Porter," and so I only played the album at a low volume and closed the window when doing so. When my curiosity about Rose overwhelmed my common sense, I decided to investigate her living quarters. I would find her diary and learn the secrets of her heart. Anything important in the house, not on canvas, was hidden in the kitchen. Searching in the spice cabinet behind the teapot Lucy kept filled with whiskey, I found a key attached to a paper disc on which was written "Nurse's Room" in my mother's hand. I planned my invasion for that afternoon. Thank you very much.
I'm going to read a couple of pages from a new book I'm working on. I'm from Mexico City, and I hate writing about Mexican stuff. And I figured I was going to write a book so I can deal with that and get everything out of the way at once. And so this is part of this project. My main character is named Alejandro, and it doesn't have anything to do with you, because you're from Nicaragua. This guy is Mexican, so don't take it personal. My aim, I guess, is to, at the end of my novel, to show that Philip Roth is a really good Mexican novelist. Alejandro looked at the mirror and he saw the bad Mexican staring back at him. It had been a while since the bad Mexican had paid Alejandro a visit, but the conversation from last night's party had brought him back in full force. Why did he always have to open his big mouth? Why tell people who don't really care that he hated or despised, he actually said, Frida Kahlo and Chavela Vargas? That he actually did not like the films by González Iñárritu, that he hated mixing English and Spanish, that he could not understand how someone could say that he was Mexican having been born in the USA. The bad Mexican never wanted to go to Mexico, not even for the Christmas season. He didn't like going to Mexican places. He did not like to discuss soccer over beer and shots of tequila. He hated mariachis and rancheras and never listened to Spanish radio stations. Mexicans, good Mexicans, normal Mexicans, or common Mexicans, who did not have a problem being adjective-ridden Mexicans, could tell right away that he was a no-good, lousy, suspicious Mexican. I should try to do something about this, he sometimes thought. This is not good. Maybe I should try. Maybe I should make an effort. Maybe I should drive over to the mission and try to spend some quality time with my own people. I'm sure it would be simple. It doesn't have to be so hard. I'm sure that anyone who looks at me and talks to me, especially any OTM, that's older than Mexican, will believe right away that I'm just another south of the border specimen, and will never figure out that I happen to be a terrible kind of self-hating Mexican. The idea of the self-hating something made him think of the self-hating Jew. He thought of chubby George Constanza. He thought of Woody Allen's Manhattan Jews. He thought of Philip Roth and Alexander Pornoy's father yelling and screaming inside of Pornoy's mind, telling his son that he was the sum of all possible family shames. You don't even deserve to be called a Jew. And you, Alejandro, said the bad Mexican who was beginning to feel embarrassed from the surface of the mirror, You don't even deserve to be called a Mexican, for no Mexican ever doubted the holiness of the Virgin of Guadalupe, or the superiority of Mexican food over Chinese or Thai, or the fact that Mexicans are the hardest working people and came here only to work and give their children a better future. There is no Mexican who ever tried to justify with silly intellectual arguments his lack of enthusiasm at joining the crowd to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. You, my friend, are the self-hating Portnoy of all Mexicans. You, Alejandro Portnoy, are nothing but a big masturbator, a chaquetero, a puñetero, a dirty and foolish man who hides from the rest of the world his sins and his shame in order to dream that a man can exist without a passport, a green card, a mark on his forehead that labels him as what he is. Remember the ones who tried to pass as something else? Remember the Coleman silks of life, the Anatole Broyards of the nation of duplicity. Remember the guy from Tijuana you met years ago and who claimed he was Italian because he could, and people actually believed him. For this is how we are in this innocent nation who loves innocence above all things. As if being Italian was a step up from anything. As if self-proclaiming a fake Italianness would cancel the Mexicanness of once diluted, troubled blood. You, Alejandro Portnoy, have brought shame to your entire people. You who masturbate dreaming of an American time where being brown will be simply irrelevant. You who think that in order to be an American writer, you have to quit your brownness, because the adjective will always get in the way of the more important noun. For the English language, which will always impose the adjective before the noun, and therefore your face will always be imposed before the actual meaning of what you do with your life. That guy walking down the street is not the writer, but the brown writer. That other one over there is not the abstract expressionist, but the black painter. That one over there is the yellow cello player. Language always makes sense to those who create its rules, yet language is never innocent. It is a familiar domain of the ones who came up with its laws and its inflexible structure. And this, Alejandro, is not your tongue. Your tongue is mutilated, it is gone, it has rotten inside your mouth along with the silence of the days where you became invisible. You bad copycat, bad sad man who still tries despite the rage and the endless disappointment of your own kin. Thank you.
This is a scene from my novel that takes place at the Litquake Lit Crawl. So it seemed like kind of a great opportunity to get to do this here. So, okay. What time is the first reader anyway, I asked. I generally didn't like bars this crowded. Someone kept elbowing me in the back, but by the time I turned around, I couldn't tell to whom the offending elbow belonged. I felt like a dog chasing her tail. Relax, Larissa slurred. I didn't expect there to be this many people, I said. I thought they'd all be at the bar with the travel writers. Larissa nodded in agreement. I thought the hipsters would all be at blog writing over at the Irish pub. I guess that's why we're not hipsters, I said. We can't even guess what they're into. Every year, Larissa and I went to Litquake's Lit Crawl to lessen the hipster intimidation factor and, in her case, increase the chances of picking up a smart guy. We tried to pick the most unpopular events in each slot. So this year, we'd selected postmenopausal writers on the meaning of life for our appetizer. And now here I was with a welt on my back. This city never failed to surprise me. The crowd was actively quieting. People were shushing and pointing toward the makeshift stage. A woman of about 60 had clambered onto it. She had silver hair pinned up in a bun and was wearing a long velvet skirt that nearly brushed the floor. I'm Sonora Watson, she said, her voice scratchy but warm, like vinyl. There was polite applause, a few scattered whoops. She lowered her head slightly to indicate her humility. Since I didn't know who she was, the gesture left me with the reverse impression of arrogance. I must confess, I was surprised to be invited to this gathering tonight, she went on. I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't even know young people were drunkenly stumbling through the streets once a year in the name of literature. Larissa and I laughed along with the crowd. There was something inviting about Sonora, a magnetism that we were all feeling. Well, we had all been drinking. It was the advantage of reading in a bar. You got a loose audience. I don't know how strictly it adheres to tonight's topic, Sonora said, but here is my inherently flawed, hopefully worthwhile attempt to approach the meaning of life. Sonora then read a first-person account of a 23-year marriage, with each year allotted one paragraph. Every word of every paragraph was perfectly tuned. There wasn't a wrong note. It was so powerful that I found myself wanting to believe it had been her own marriage, though I reconsidered when the husband died midway through the final year. That last paragraph contained the narrator's remembrance of her husband's wedding vow, when he swore that he'd never be afraid to let her change him, especially if it was for the better. The crowd froze for a few seconds after she had finished, as if she had asked for a moment of silence. Then we exploded into applause. She stood in the spotlight with what appeared to be tears in her eyes, repeating her earlier head bow. I tore through the festival program to see her bio. It began, Sonora Watson is a retired psychotherapist living in Napa, California. She's a therapist, I hissed. Go to her, Larissa said passionately. She said it as if this was the penultimate scene of a romantic comedy, and I had to catch Sonora at the airport before she left me forever. The next speaker was taking the stage. As Sonora tried to move through the crowd, she was waylaid by audience member after audience member. I had never seen so many people simultaneously moved by a performance. I want to talk to her, but what would I say? I asked Larissa. I monitored Sonora's progress with one eye. Well, what are you trying to get from her? Larissa's question was surprisingly cogent for someone who just polished off her third drink in under an hour. I want her to come out of retirement and help me. I didn't really mean that, except that I did. Do you think that's realistic? Now, that question was the caliber I'd been expecting. Of course I don't think it's realistic. You keep thinking, I need to find the restroom. She tottered away on her 3-inch heels. I wasn't even listening to the reader on stage. I was staring at Sonora. She was talking to 3 20-something women. We were all looking for the secret, it seemed. Suddenly, Larissa was back and grabbing at my arm. We need to leave, she said, panicked. Right now. Why? Dustin's here, and he's with someone. She was on the verge of tears. And she's really, really cute. Did he see you? No, that's why we need to get out now. I can't talk to him. I'm a mess. I don't want him to know I'm a mess. Now the tears were streaming down her face. Are you sure that he's really with her, that they're not just friends? She's hanging all over him, and I didn't even get to pee, she wailed. Let's go then, I said resignedly. We'll catch the end of travel writing, or at least use the bathroom. I took her arm, and we fought our way out the door. I cast a last, sad look back at Sonora, who was being accosted by yet another animated female. It was just as well. I still hadn't found anything to say. I tried to comfort Larissa as I led her to the next bar, and it seemed to be working. But when we were almost at the door, she shrank back in terror. I can't go in there, she said, shaking her head frantically. We don't have to stay. Let's just use the bathroom, and then we'll go home. I made my voice as dulcet as possible. What if Kevin's in there with his wife? Or Sean with his fiancée? Or Philip with his wife? What if I just keep seeing them? She leaned against the front of the laundromat next door. The elderly Asian woman inside looked out at us curiously, then resumed her folding. Your exes won't be there, especially not Philip. I bet he's illiterate. Larissa started out laughing, but then she was crying. I bet Dustin's engaged to that girl. I bet they were standing there listening to that story and thinking that would be them in 23 years. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket, except for the cancer part. He was just on a date. You've had dates since you two broke up. What does that matter? I'm never getting married, Nora. I'm never going to have the meaning of life. She sank down to the ground, her back pressed against the glass. I sat down next to her. I could smell fabric softener. First of all, that's not true. But second of all, who says that's the meaning of life? It was a beautiful story, but if you actually think about it, it's kind of hokey. There's nothing hokey about loving someone with all your heart and having them love you the same way. And that's the thing, Nora. She welled up again. That's not how anyone has ever loved me. That's why they leave me. And then as soon as they do, they meet the love of their life. I'm everyone's good luck charm but mine. I didn't know what to say as she sobbed beside me. She was right. There was nothing hokey about a great love to span a lifetime. In Sonora's story, years 3, 7, 12, and obviously 23 had been painful. Some years had been boring, but put them all together, and it was a life of great love. That was how it was done, the only way it could be done. The previously empty sidewalk was now jammed with people shuffling to their next literary event. I held Larissa as they streamed by. Thank you.
I'm just going to read 2 pages of fiction from the last kind of 2 pages I wrote in my novel. After the events at Entertainment Room number 17, Sun Moon rode slowly home with the man who'd been pretending to be her husband, Commander Ga. The imposter didn't seem to have his own name. He used Ga's, just as he wore Ga's clothes, drank his clear liquor, and slept just as her husband had on the couch. He drove with the high beams on down Cholima Street and Reunification Boulevard. They were in a car called a Mustang, and there were no other cars on the road. Passing through Mansu Park, they could see families in the dark stealing chestnuts from the trees. At dinner, everyone had called him Commander Gaw, even though he looked nothing like Commander Gaw. And after he was challenged to a good-natured Taekwondo demonstration for the pleasure of all, she somehow knew that this man wasn't going to leave, that her husband wasn't coming back, and from now on, this man wouldn't be wished away. He would have to be dealt with, just as her husband had to be dealt with. They crossed the Taedong River, the bridge lights showing the color of his bruises. They drove through the Martyrs Cemetery and the amusement park. Passing the zoo, she asked about the vehicle they were driving. "This is a famous car, yes?" Instead of answering, he slowed and turned sideways in the road. In the headlights was a man running from the zoo with an ostrich egg in his hands. Chasing him uphill with flashlights were 2 watchmen. "Do you feel for the man hungry enough to steal?" Commander Gaw asked, "or for the men who must hunt him down?" "Isn't it the bird who suffers?" she asked. He put the car in gear, drove past the botanical gardens with their high electric fences to secure the hybrid crops inside. "So where did you get this car?" she asked. He didn't answer. "You know it's a fake, right?" "This kind of car," he said, "is revered in America. They are quite rare." "Oh, I recognize this car," she said. "It was a prop in one of my movies, the one where the Americans are repelled and MacArthur is caught fleeing. This was the car he was escaping in. I had a scene where I kissed a traitor right here in the back seat. Of course, he wasn't a traitor, but the actor Han Pak." "How did you get this thing off the property lot?" One switch in the road above the botanical gardens, and they were at her house. Inside, the children were asleep, and he pulled a bottle of Rayoksan from the cool place under the sink. He held it with a hand whose knuckles fanned yellow. She had nursed many of her husband's broken hands. She said, "You have chosen to become a man who was born to violence." He answered, "It was Commander Gaw who chose me." "Okay, Commander Gaw," Sun Moon said. "I will turn down the sheets for us." The bed faced a balcony overlooking Mount Taesong. Across the river was Pyongyang aglow. The 2 disrobed and entered from either side, where they lay awake, waiting for 10 o'clock when the electricity would turn off. It is a common misconception that listening devices turn off with the power. On the mantel above them, out of the children's reach, was the can of peaches Comrade Buck had given them. When the house and the city below went dark, Sun Moon spoke. "Here are the rules," she said. "The children will reveal their names to you when they decide to do so. You will never use Taekwondo on them. Tonight you discovered that my husband's friends are happy to hurt you in public. I can have them do it again. And you will never touch me," she said. From below, they could hear dogs baying in the central zoo. "Wait, I take that back. You are allowed to touch me, only if I touch you first." "Are there more rules?" he asked. "I'm thinking," she said. A quick blue flash filled the room. Then all was dark again. "In prison," he said, "so many people threw themselves at the electric fence that they had to build another fence to keep them off of it." Thanks.